This is Castle 1. Race officer speaking.
Lane line is on boundary up ahead, 35 seconds out.
A bit lower and faster here.
That's a good one, Jimmy.
Still gaining on the lane line there.
We're looking at 10.5 and 42. Matching him on the boundary, yeah, copy.
Hi podcast listeners, welcome again to the podcast. It's so good to have you with us. I hope wherever you are on the planet, you're finding time to get wet every once in a while. It's my favourite time of year here in Cowes. The town is alive and kicking, and this year's racing seems to very much be in full swing. Every time I look out of my window, the cannons at the Royal Yacht Squadron are firing. There's another race starting, and this week the Solent has been glistening with a lot of wood and white trousers. It's classic week. Love the classics. It's so good to see. Well, no wooden boats for me. I've mostly been racing offshore double-handed with British offshore star Henry Bomby. We're getting there, making progress towards being race ready for the Fastnet race later this summer. If you want to see how we've been getting on, head to our YouTube channel, Shirley Robertson's Sailing Podcast on YouTube. We've just published part 3 of our mini-series, beautifully filmed and edited by Tim, of course. And Henry and I, well, we're doing our best to film our way through the offshore segments. Take a look and let me know what you think, or if you want to know more about the joys of double-handed sailing, then please do get in touch. Just quickly before we get going, thanks to everyone who reached out about last month's pod, the one and only Brad Butterworth. Many of you thought it was the best yet. We do all love a guest who's not afraid to voice an opinion. So thanks again, Brad, for just being you. It was well received. Also, a massive thanks to all of you who contributed and left lovely messages on buymeacoffee.com. It makes a difference. So a big heartfelt thanks to all of you for your support. We've said it before, but we're really keen to keep these pods ad-free, so we'll run with it a little while longer. If you enjoy listening to this pod and you want to support us, then it's all very simple. Go to buymeacoffee.com/sailing podcast. It's super quick, super easy, and it's greatly appreciated. And it keeps your listening free of any annoying adverts. We're lucky in our sport that we have some very compelling communicators. Sailors who not only excel at their craft, but have a way of bringing their experiences to life, drawing in the audience, sharing the reality of life on a race boat. New Zealander Mike Sanderson is one of those characters. You'll hear, you could listen to him forever. It's hard to pin down, but very quickly you'll hear just how much he loves our sport and how much he loves talking about it. But he's also a man you want to front your big boat programme, a strong leader, a winning skipper of the Volvo Ocean Race, and now helming one of sailing's biggest commercial concerns, a CEO of Doyle Sails. We spoke to Mike, Moose as the sailing world knows him, on his rather lovely motorboat, the day before we left Auckland to fly home after the Kiwis' emphatic win of the 36th America's Cup. So naturally, Mike kicks off by savouring his nation's victory. I hope you enjoy the time I spent with Mike Sanderson.
I just loved boats, and I still love boats, and people still think I'm strange. All walks of life seem to come out to watch America's Cup racing in New Zealand. My first time around the world was like reading a book about the round the world race.
Mike Sanderson, welcome to the podcast. It's so good to have you on the pod, and thanks for making the time.
No, thank you very much. Lovely to be here, and it feels like we're just coming up for air after the previous weeks and months of America's Cup World. So, no, lovely to be here.
Yeah, as you say, we're here in Auckland, your home, a few days after the 36th America's Cup has finished. There's sort of a post-America's Cup depression, isn't there, in Auckland now? Emirates Team New Zealand, of course, lifted the trophy, and I mean, a real unforgettable moment for New Zealand. More people watched at home on the television than for a royal wedding. I mean, it's extraordinary. I mean, the Hauraki Gulf also filled with supporter boats. I mean, what did you make of it all, Mike?
Oh, I mean, it was an unbelievable occasion, and it was amazing. When I was earlier in the year, I was talking to many of the super yacht owners who I was lucky enough to still be in contact with and sailing with, etc. And they were saying, "Oh, it's a shame it's not going to be the spectacle that it was." And I said, "Whew, you wait. You know, we saw it with Super Rugby here in New Zealand. As you know, it was slowly dwindling numbers. Then, as soon as we came out of COVID, the stadiums were all packed. You know, and so." I had a funny feeling that the America's Cup turnout was going to be huge here. I mean, New Zealand's famous for every person in a kayak or an inflatable boat or anything getting out there and getting amongst it. And yeah, I'm not sure if it's a depression, which we're seeing here in Auckland, of it being over, or a hangover, to be honest. You know, I think there was a pretty good party on Wednesday night, and I think the country needed it. And the world probably needed it a little bit, and what better excuse, you know, because let's be honest, it was a fantastic match, and you know, to have gone 4-4, 4-4, yeah, to go on 4-4 was amazing, you know, and when we all kind of were expecting it to go one way or the other, and so for them to be 4-4 after those first couple of days was just unreal. So, no, very cool.
Yeah, it was good fun. We spoke to Team New Zealand coach Ray Davies on the pod before the match, and he talked of how aware the team is of all the guys that came before. You know, how the jersey in a way is just on loan. You know, you wore the black jersey in the successful defence of 2000. I mean, can you explain what it means and what it meant to the guys of 2021?
Yeah, I think it's a very, you know, it's part of the sporting mantra which seems to have been spoken about a lot more in recent times in New Zealand sport, and I'm sure around the world as well. And you hear the All Blacks to speak about it, you hear the Silver Ferns speak about it, you know, you hear the Black Sticks and all the national teams speak about it more and more, and you know how when it's your turn to wear the national jersey, that you know you try and make it better and try and, well, certainly not detract from it, but try and, you know, be part of that history. And you know, I think this Team New Zealand team has you know done such an amazing job of, you know, representing the country in what's been a unbelievably difficult now 15 months or whatever it is. Yeah, so it's, you know, I think, you know, they treaded very carefully through lockdown, and they, you know, they continued to train, but they were very, you know, did it very tastefully, and they were very conscious of social distance, etc. So no, I think, you know, it's been a very cool thing for us to have had, you know, Team New Zealand operating in these tricky times, having Team New Zealand, you know, flying the flag, and then, you know, having these wonderful teams then show up and really, you know, doing it pretty tough to get here, all doing their 2 weeks in quarantine, and you know, the ups and downs of the country going into lockdown even while they were here, which, you know, never a bad word was spoken about that, which, yeah, they all just got it. And they all, I think, you know, we all should be so proud of, you know, as sailors and supporters of sailing, of how well those teams represented our sport. I just thought it was outstanding.
I think we all felt quite privileged to be here, to be visitors in your country. It was pretty special. We're going to come back, Mike, to your own cup experiences, and of course a whole lot more, but let's first wind the clock back a bit. I mean, how did you get the sailing bug, and what are your memories of growing up involved in the sport in New Zealand?
It was, I mean, you know, I was, you know, I'm from a couple of hours north of Auckland. I'm from a medical-based family. My grandfather and my father and my mother and you know, my family are very medically based, and we were very busy when I was a kid. So we didn't have a whole lot of time, you know, they didn't have a whole lot of time to invest to take my sailing to what I would now call a Grand Prix level. And one of the things which I love watching about the sailors of today is just how unbelievably good they are at 10, 11, 12. You know, you go and watch an Optimist race now, and I mean, they are so far in front of where certainly we all were at that age, you know, and we were, you know, thrashing around and still dragging our boat up the beach and sailing to, you know, to sandbanks to have picnics and things. And yes, we were racing, but, you know, we weren't nailing the shifts and just the big picture which they seem to have got now. So my sailing was, you know, for my childhood, I certainly had the passion for it. I wasn't a naturally gifted sailor by any stretch of the imagination, but I love boats. In fact, you know, for my first 8 years of my life, you know, 7 years of my life, my dream for Christmas Day and my birthday would have been a tin dinghy with an outboard. That's what I wanted, you know. And I was probably disappointed when my Optimist turned up, if I'm being brutally honest. So, you know, I just loved boats, and I still love boats. And people still think I'm strange how I can come back from, you know, when I come back from a Volvo leg, and then Emma and I would go away on the boat. And, you know, so I just love boating, and that led me, you know, in my day, you know, there really wasn't professional sailing when I was a kid growing up. And of course I was at secondary school when New Zealand entered the Freemantle America's Cup in '87. And, you know, that was the first time that this country sort of went crazy. It's the first time, to be honest, most of us we'd all watched the '83 America's Cup. And obviously I was really young then, but the '87 New Zealand went crazy. And so that's between that and the 89, you know, the 1989-90 Whitbread race with Steinlager 2 and Fisher and Paykel. Between Freemantle and Blake's Whitbread win were the two things which really made me decide that's for me, that's my future.
What kind of child were you? I mean, were you always looking out the window from the classroom? You'd see how windy it was.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, I was that kid that was keen to go and do something outdoors. As I said, I wasn't until my teens, you know, that passionate about the racing aspect of it. And even now, you know, my racing side of it, I haven't ever gone down a one design path. I love honestly, my motivation is trying to make boats go faster than other people. And I love the science of it. I love, you know, the fascination of sails and masts and keels and you know, the hydro and aero side of it. So I'm not a good enough sailor to go and win a race in a laser or something. My laser needs a taller rig and a more efficient mainsail and better appendages, and then I can smash it, you know. So yeah, I love that whole boat balance and making boats go fast. And so I was probably daydreaming out the window on how I could make my boat go faster, rather than how I was going to win the pin and cross the fleet.
The outboard engine.
Yeah, well, the outboard would have been a good start, yeah.
As a parent of teenagers, I'm thoroughly disapproving that you left school early to become an apprentice sailmaker. I mean, what did your parents think, and what drove you to do that? It's a pretty radical step. Yeah,
it was. And as I said, I was from a very highly educated family, and I had made the final group to be that head boy was going to be selected from one of Auckland's most elite private schools, which my parents had put me through. And yeah, I left a year before my final year because I got an apprenticeship offer at North Sails. So but I'd made up my mind that at that stage, all my heroes were sailmakers who, if you only got to look through, the New Zealand challenges of 87 and 92 and 95, and even the boys who are still out on the TP52 circuit, the Kiwi trimmers are all sailmakers, and even Brad Butterworth and Grant Dalton and Kevin Shoebridge and Tony Ray and all these guys did their time sailmaking. So it was a very, at that time, being in the trade was a ticket to into the professional world. So yeah, I did leave early, but obviously have never looked back, because in saying that, the skills and the life skills and the respect and things that I learned from that schooling and the network have done me very well, and I wouldn't change any of it now, even in hindsight.
I remember on Paul Cairds' podcast, a similar story. Quite early on, he's working in a sail loft. And obviously doing your apprenticeship, he's cutting patch after patch.
Yeah.
And he suddenly sort of realised, right, I'm not sure this is quite what I expected.
No, exactly. And you do have to do the hard yards, but it's interesting, I still, just learning to work and learning, how that things don't come easily, is it's an interesting time in your life, isn't it? And a great example is Richard Meacham over at Team New Zealand, and when I did my first Whitbread race in whatever that was, 93, 94, he was the storeman. He was running the store at Lidgard Sales here in Ellerslie. And he called me Mr. Sanderson, and even though I was only 4 years older than him or whatever I was, and here he was, and he's the same. He's basically the same kid that he is now, but he never, from that day to this day, does anyone work any harder than Dick does, and he's just put his head down. And I remember the first time I brought him to a boat, and I took him out sailing to fit some sails, and we pulled him up the mast. This is a guy that's gone on to be an America's Cup bowman. He got his foot jammed between the mast and the D2, and so suddenly we're bouncing him up, and boom, he stops dead because Dick's got his foot jammed in the ring. I'm sure he hasn't made that mistake again, but that's going to haunt him forever. And now we've brought it up on your podcast, so the world's going to get to hear Dick's foot jam story. But an amazing example, and I'm so super proud, of my time with him when we were younger, especially, and watching, him being such a key member of what they did over there at Team New Zealand. It's very cool.
It's interesting you bring him up. I mean, if any of our listeners watched The Rescue of American Magic, yeah. He's the kind of really skinny guy with the grey hair who just seemed to arrive.
Without a shirt.
Yeah, no shirt on, and just took over the whole operation. Yeah. He's that kind of guy.
Absolutely, and he was with them, towing. He was still with them at 10:30 at night, sitting on the boat without his shirt on as they towed it back in, and I have no doubt was instrumental with Daltz and Shube in Team New Zealand building the part, to go back in the American Magic boat. That's just what he's about. So no, very, very special.
There's a lot of real legends, Kiwi legends from that era. And Mike, I've heard you talk about NZ, the AC Challenge in 87 that you mentioned, where New Zealand made the Challenger final. And I've heard you mention that it was such a game changer for the sport here in New Zealand. I mean, what did you mean by that? And how did it affect Mike Sanderson?
Well, it probably affected me a lot because that's the year I left. The year after that, I left school, and at the end of '88 is when I left school, and so I basically lived every moment of that with them. I was boarding at school, and so I got to watch every race, and I can still to this day, although it might take a little bit of time, but rattle off the crew, and it was the first. I mean, it was almost our first taste in New Zealand of professional sport, full stop. At that stage, of course, the All Blacks were still amateurs, and obviously we had a long history in motor racing and things, but we didn't sort of, people who sailed or played rugby or things weren't able to do it competitively for a living. So it was a deal. The guys still joke they were $150 a week or whatever they were on. It was only, can't really say they were making a living. But, I think certainly in this country it was, we got to see people, training in the gym to go sailing, and we got to see, sails being made specifically for an event, and it just changed so many things. Before that, yes, we'd had successful Admirals Cup teams and Kenwood Cup teams and Olympians, etc. But, KZ7 and Freemantle was very much, the time when the rest of New Zealand, I guess, witnessed professional sailing, the country went nuts for it and hasn't recovered since, really. As we saw over the last couple of weeks, all walks of life seem to come out to watch America's Cup racing in New Zealand. And we don't really see that when we're travelling the world. It seems to be a sort of certain type of person that goes and watches sailing, or a certain type of person that goes and watches rugby, etc. Those always cracks me up. For a Volvo Ocean Race start or an America's Cup event in New Zealand, it's just like whoom, the whole country shows up in whatever floats, and off they go, risking life and limb. So yeah, the 5 knots in the harbour made a big difference. I think it was a lot less life-threatening to be out there this time than it ever has been before, because normally it's just chaos.
I've done a few Volvo finishes here. You feel pretty lucky to get back to the dock.
Yeah,
pee.
Exactly.
Yes. What were you doing, Mike, at that time to get noticed in the sailing world?
Yeah, I was really lucky, and I was working hard in the sail loft. I was lucky to have won a New Zealand class, the Elliott 5.9, which basically was the Elliott 6 boat, which went on to be the women's match racing boat in London. And I had just won the Elliott 5.9 Nationals in New Zealand, and then I got asked to sail on a 40-footer in a coastal race, which was, as it turned out, was navigated by Murray Ross, who was a famous New Zealand designer. And a very competitive international sailor, and he had navigated Grant Dalton's Fisher and Paykel in the 89-90 race. And anyway, we did this coastal race, and Murray asked me to steer, and 4 hours later I'm still steering his boat. And then we got to Russell, which is in the Bay of Islands, which is where the race finishes, and he said to me, a few beers later, he said to me, I want you to reply with Daltz for the Whitbread race. And I kind of just assumed it was the beer and the rum talking, as the case might be, and didn't do anything about it. I'd had these huge dreams of doing the race, and basically everything I'd done to date was about doing the Whitbread race. But I thought I was one more away. I was only 20 years old at that stage, and now 21. And so I thought I was one more cycle away on my path. Anyway, sure enough, 3 weeks later, Murray rang me up and said, listen, I've just spoken to Daltz and he hasn't heard from you. And I was like, oh, well, that's because I haven't contacted him. He said, well, get on with it. Okay, so there I was. I've still actually got the letter. My mum's good at keeping stuff. And, dear Mr. Dalton, my name is Mike Sanderson. I sail with Murray Ross on his boat Satellite Spy, and I would love to do the Whitbread race with you, And anyway, so in those days, it was, basically the public applied to because it was New Zealand Endeavour, and it was a Kiwi campaign, with government company sponsors, lotteries and international brands and things. We were literally queued up outside the Royal Yacht Squadron, and anyone could apply. So I'm standing in the queue there, and then I come through and meet, I can still remember as if it was yesterday, which is a bit embarrassing, but I can still remember Kevin Shoebridge and Glenn Sowery and Murray Ross and Grant, who I did my interview with. And 2 weeks later, I get this lovely letter saying I've been accepted. So that was just, for me, that's a game changer. I'll be forever thankful for the guy who, got me on Murray Ross's boat, and for Murray for giving me the chance. As it turned out, Murray didn't end up doing the race with us. Mike Quilter ended up navigating New Zealand Endeavour. But, I've kept in touch with them all. And what was unbelievable about that campaign was, was that, it was only 5 years after Freemantle. And all my heroes from Fremantle, well, so many of them from Fremantle were actually sailing on the boat. So Kevin Shoebridge, Tony Ray, Mike Quilter, these guys had all been literally posters on my wall, and now I'm getting to sail around the world with them, and so it was very special, and still is.
What did you make of Grant Dalton? What did you make of him?
Yeah, Daltz is a great mate, and he the things that Daltz and the opportunities Daltz has given me is very special. And Daltz is he gets the people around him he wants, and he's very trusting, and he gives I was a watch captain for Daltz at 26 years old. Now, I don't think in any of my racing I've since done I would even consider having a 26-year-old watch captain, And he believed in me, and he gave us the freedom and the ability to develop the sails that we wanted to do. And Daltz is amazing. He knows what he's good at, and he knows what he wants, what he's looking at in people, and you can see that over there. I was fortunate enough to be allowed inside on Wednesday night after, late into the evening, and
at Team New Zealand.
And you can, they've done an amazing job of just getting nice people, haven't they? I still laugh. I'd love to know where the no wankers sticker is on the boat, because it will be there. Every boat that Pete and Blair have ever raced, they have that branding. So but they've achieved that with and that all comes from Daltz. Love him or hate him, he's always had very good teams with him that he has chosen to have around him. So that's a skill which I learned from him, and I took into all my campaigns and have taken into the business now. The day you're not happy to hire better people than you are, then you've lost the plot. You're gonna cap how far things can go.
It was your first time around the planet on boats. Looking back, we're pretty brutal.
Yeah.
What memories do you have of your first time around the world?
My first time around the world was like reading a book about the round the world race. We were in New Zealand, and we did a round New Zealand tour, and we were at the yacht clubs, and that's what I'd read that the guys did the time before. So then we were doing it, and then we shipped the boat to Europe, and then we were in the handball, like all Whitbread crews sort of seemed they had to be, and then we're in the King and Queen, and then we're doing the Fastnet race, and then we, started in the Solent, and we're off to Punta del Este, and Neptune nailed us going across the equator. So it was just honestly, it was like reading a book on the Whitbread race and the Volvo and things, and And then in the Southern Ocean, we broke the mizzen mast, and then we got becalmed coming into Freemantle and got past. And so just every thing which I dreamt about, or good and bad, all happened. It was just, even looking back on it now, it was a very surreal time, because here I was with the legends that I'd been idolizing for so long, and in the latest, Maxi, which was designed to sort of contort the rule, designed by Bruce Farr, built at Martin Marine, and I'd been involved in the sail program. It really didn't get any better. And I got I got to steer, and I got to be one of the trimmers, and did a lot of driving, in my first race, which again, was just an amazing experience.
It's mad, isn't it? You're 22 years old.
Yeah.
What about the big seas? I mean, a lot more people have done it now, of course. But what was it like heading off into the Southern Ocean? Yeah, well, we did that hideous leg from Punta del Este to Fremantle. And, and it was just brutal. It was, we were frozen wind gear and icicles hanging off the lifelines. And it was all the things which you sort of read about and things. So 8,000 nautical miles. Yeah, in a lead mine, in a bloody slow boat, really. I mean, they were fast for IOR boats, but, compared to now, it was pretty grisly. And Doltz had done some deal with our wet weather gear, and so we were wearing some wet weather gear made by not a wet weather company. So it was pretty miserable. And we did this funny documentary, which is still around to haunt us all, which was called No Good Calling for Mum. And we were sponsored by Television New Zealand. It was quite a clever sponsorship deal where basically all the sponsors of the team partnered with Television New Zealand. And anyway, we did this documentary, and you were supposed to lock yourself in the back of the boat and turn on this little video camera on the wall, and it was supposed to be totally your diary, your personal diary. So we're all in there going, oh, it's terrible, here we are again, mizzen mast fallen down, it's freezing, I miss my home, my dog's sick, and anyway, as I said, it's still around to haunt us. But interesting times. I mean, it was, we did some brutal legs, freezing cold and wet and miserable, but it set us all up, for the rest of our lives. And I still sail with most of the people that were on that team. There's a few that are retired or gone their separate ways, but so many of the guys, I race with, and Brad Jackson and Stu Bannatyne and Sean Clarkson and so many of the guys, we still do so much together, let alone, Shub and Glenn Sowery, etc., etc. So, amazing times. I've got to find that documentary. No, you don't. Yeah. I'm having, spent quite a while interviewing Kiwis. I'm imagining a boat full of Kiwi guys trying to do a video diary. Yeah. Imagine what that's like. Exactly. Called No Good Calling for Mum. But anyway, no, it was an interesting time. Post 2000, of course, was probably the biggest turning point in professional sailing. Luckily, I learned when to speak up and when to shut up, because a fair few times as a young rookie, you're like, oh, what are these old boys doing, So you're 22 and you win the Whitbread. Yeah. I mean, what are your memories? I mean, that would have been, I guess, sailing into Southampton, of course. What was that like for a young Mike Sanderson? Yeah, I mean, it was unbelievable. And the question was, how does it get any better than this? You're 22, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do the Whitbread race. I wanted to, I wanted to win the Whitbread race. I wanted to be part of a team to win the Whitbread race. And here I was, 5 years after leaving school or whatever, I'd sort of ticked that one off. So it was amazing. And
again, I remember Dolts coming, we're literally sailing up the Solent waterways, and Dolts saying to us, you know, soak it up, boys. This is to a few of the younger guys. We were all together in one part of the boat, and he goes, there's nothing more over, than a Whitbread race. Tomorrow we're doing something else, and so enjoy today. And it was very wise words, and it was very real, because the next day you're suddenly like, shit, now what, but yeah, I mean, it was, again, we had a great party, and but it was an unbelievable time. And coming back to my schooling and things, I think, luckily I learned when to speak up and when to shut up, and that, because a fair few times as a young rookie, and you're like, oh, what are these old boys doing? We should have bigger shoot up or bigger jib up, or why we got a reef in, and next minute, boom, the black cloud, and you go, okay, I'm glad I didn't say anything. So, it was an amazing life lesson and sailing lesson, and, it was a very cool time.
How did being on that crew on the winning boat change your life?
I think it, as I said before, so many of those relationships which came from that first, that first lap have gone on to be such a big part of my life, and, obviously I went on to do another lap with Grant with Merit Cup, and that certainly changed things for me, because I was a young watch captain on Merit Cup, and I'm still very good friends with them all, and I still because the campaign was a success, then things get left on a positive note, and that sort of belief is that you work well together as a team, and it was just for my first professional campaign, there's no doubt it being lucky enough to be part of a winning one, because let's be honest, I probably didn't contribute that much, but to be lucky enough to be part of a winning one is a really big deal, and especially if you're privileged enough to do it, and I'm sure there's others, there's other leaders, if you like, that are capable of doing it, but to get to do it in a Dalton camp, where, let's be honest, the work ethos is set, by him, and that just sets you up for life, that the benchmark is set. Blake obviously set a new benchmark with the Steinlager campaign of what it was going to take to dominate the Whitbread race. And, I think we moved that benchmark again with New Zealand Endeavour. And, I think Ilbrook did it again when they won the race. And I'd like to think, we did it again with ABN AMRO. So, and it's gone on since then, don't get me wrong. But yeah, I think that, for me, on my first chance to get to do it in a Dalton-led campaign, set me on the right foot. There's no doubt about it.
As you said, 97 Dolts wanted you back. Talk to me about the Merit Cup Whitbread campaign. Yeah,
the Merit Cup Whitbread campaign was an interesting one, because obviously we'd come out of New Zealand Endeavour, and to be fair with Merit Cup, we probably, I'm sure Dolts would admit this, we didn't lead we didn't find what the next level of professionalism in Whitbread or Volvo racing was going to do. So we probably rested too much on our 93, 94 culture, as opposed to going, okay, that level of intensity did at that time, what's next? And so we were a bit slower hitting the ground than we should have been. We had a fantastic crew, but we didn't. The boat wasn't as good as it should have been, and we didn't push the boat out hard enough with regards to ultimate performance. We didn't. The boat was a little bit of an average build, and it was a little bit of a conservative design, and it was a little, everything was not, one thing which I see now, which they do so well in Team New Zealand, and I still see other teams making the same mistake, Team New Zealand put the hardest foils on that they can sail with, and then they go and learn how to use them. Whereas other teams go, we're not going to be able to do that. So this is what we have to use. Team New Zealand have just never operated like that in at least the last 2 cup cycles. And I guess it's longer than that if you think of their foiling boat in San Francisco. And it's amazing that it's taken so long, and yet you still see other teams compromising what they probably know was faster, but accepted that you were going to be vulnerable here, or it was going to be too hard to operate, or whatever. And we were probably too like that with Merit Cup. We were probably too conservative, and again rested on. But don't get me wrong, we sailed the boat very hard, and we had in my opinion, we had the best. We had a lot of us that could steer the boat, and so we learned a lot, and we learned quickly, and we sailed well enough to get back to second, which was remarkable, to be honest. So we definitely got the most out of what was probably a bit of a slow start.
All right. By 2000, you were part of the Cup with Team New Zealand. I mean, how did that come about, and what was your role, Mike? Yeah,
so I sort of dodged that one off my CV, because I really just came in for the last couple of months to give them a hand. When they went into their final lineup for the Cup cycle, Dean Barker literally rang me up. I'd been busy, obviously, with Merit Cup, and hadn't really been involved in the Cup cycle. I'd actually done some coaching for America True, and I was quite involved. At that stage, we'd done a Marisha transatlantic record attempt, and we were sailing that boat more. And because I had actually just started skippering the Marisha boats when they started racing. And so yes, I literally got the privilege, and I very much say it as a privilege, to go and join Team New Zealand for the last few months when they went into their in-house racing part of the campaign for the end. And that was amazing. It was, because I'd been sort of involved with the challenges, I never forget, Russell came up to me on the dock afterwards and said, how do you think we're going? And I just had to answer. I said, you guys are in a whole nother league. This is not, and I'm not just telling you that. This is going to be an absolute whitewash, which it was, And for me, 2000 is still one of the most dominant Team New Zealand performances of, Russell was and Brad, and, Warwick and Simon, and, all the guys were very much at the top of their match racing game. They were dominating the tour, and it was just a very cool thing to be a part of. And they'd obviously developed with Laurie Davidson in 57 and NZL 60s, some very cool boats. And within a few days of sailing with them, I knew that it was going to be a bit of a slam dunk, them defending that cup, because it really was quite a powerhouse.
How big was that? I mean, to the nation here in New Zealand, it's hard to think of a time that a sailing event has ever meant so much to a country.
Yeah, well, I did think that, and I didn't think that was beatable, but I do wonder whether last week didn't gazump that. I mean, I think obviously, 2000 was amazing, and it was an unbelievable spectacle. But I think this, the guys were so dominant in 2000. A 5-zip when the Kiwi likes to be the battler a little bit, And so there's something about how amazing Luna Rossa were as a challenger, and how, from a story of watching those Team New Zealand guys having to grow through that series, because I think there's, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I think if time had gone on further, that was just going to get more and more dominant. They were. They didn't make the same mistake twice all week, and they were just learning to race that boat and learning how to make it go faster and learning on where their wind shadows were and things. So I thought 2000 was, in our time to date, was going to be hard to beat, but I honestly think last week might have done it.
2000 though was massive here, and then there was the big breakup that followed.
Yeah.
I mean, how did you learn about what was going on with Russell and with Alinghi, and how did all that affect what was going on?
Well, I was already sailing with Larry Ellison on Sayonara in those days, and so in that 98, 99, and then 2000 period, it was pretty interesting times. And it was Tony Ray, so we can throw him under the bus. Long-standing Team New Zealand, cornerstone of Trey. We were with Larry. I'm pretty sure it was in Sardinia, where he said to me, "Well, you understand that you could do the America's Cup, and we could get a very good crew." And now Trey ended up, as it turned out, staying with Team New Zealand, and most of the rest of the Sayonara guys went to Oracle. But yeah, I mean, it was post 2000, of course, was probably the biggest turning point in professional sailing that we've seen since the day of people starting to be paid at all. Because, there it went from something that you could possibly live on to literally overnight salaries tripled, quadrupled, whatever you like. And suddenly, every man and his dog was putting up their hand saying they're a professional sailor. So the negotiations for crew for the 2003 America's Cup was, a really interesting time. And, it was a great time to be a professional sailor. It was a tough time to put a cup team together.
We talked about your Whitbread experiences in part 1, Mike, but you also, as you said, started sailing on Sayonara with Larry Ellison. Am I right? You started sailing with them just after the 1998 Hobart.
Yes, yeah. So Richard Meacham and I was contacted about doing that 98 Hobart, and because I'd actually done some sailing with them when they first put the boat in the water here in 95. And then all the Team New Zealand Hevs came back on after the Cup in San Diego, and so I didn't make the cut. And then I was going to do the 98 Hobart with them, but Dick and I were doing the 12-foot skiff into Dominions on Auckland Harbour, so I gracefully declined that, and then did the next year with them, which was amazing. And it was a fantastic time to get to know Larry. I was doing the main sheet for him, so still to this day I've sort of kept in touch. Just actually doing a super yacht project with him at the moment, and I was very lucky, being that close to Larry. I was one of the names that he knew, because that wasn't ever his strength on any of his teams. And so it was an interesting time. So yes, so Sayonara then led on to the 2003. I joined them for the 2003 Cup, and it was an obvious place for me to go. Not so much from a Team New Zealand standpoint, but at that stage I was very active in North Sales, and Larry was obviously a big client of mine from a sail making standpoint, and so the ultimate obviously was to turn that into an America's Cup team. So yeah, that went well.
Yeah, there's a lot of sales in an America's Cup.
There's a lot, and there was a lot back then. If only we had that many now, yeah, it'd be good for the sailmakers.
What was it like sailing with Larry Ellis? I mean, how passionate was he about the sport?
Yeah, I mean, he's unbelievable. You know, we had so many amazing times sailing with Larry. You know, there's so many cool stories. You know, we were sitting on the rail going up to the Chicago Mac race, and you know, the gentleman I'm sitting next to, and he said, "Oh, what do you do, Mike?" And I said, "Oh, I'm a sailmaker. I work for North Sales." And I said, "Oh, what do you do?" And he said, "Oh, well, I own a chain of hardware stores." I said, "Oh, yeah, that's cool." He goes, "You might have heard of it. It's called the Home Depot." I'm like, "Right, yep, no, rightio." Yeah, so every time we had a guest or someone was, you know, someone unbelievably wealthy or famous, or so, you know, it was always interesting to see who was going to turn up with Larry, you know, from a guest standpoint and things. So no, very cool. And obviously the planes and the boats and the you know, I remember we won a race in Sardinia in the Maxi Worlds, and there was whatever we sailed with 22 people or something, and he said, you know, "Right, guys, what do you want for dinner?" Like, and of course, American boat, and one of the guys shouts out, "Can we have, you know, buffalo wings and ribs?" And here we are in Italy, probably 4:30 in the evening, and the poor chef on his boat for 40 people has to organise buffalo wings and ribs. And sure enough, we turn up 2 hours later, and it's, you know, so, I mean, Larry was an amazing character, and it is an amazing character, and yeah, it'd be, yeah, we need to get him back racing yachts, that's for sure. I don't know if he's got any desire to get back in the America's Cup, but we need to get him back racing, because he loves it. You know, he, as a sailor, we saw him sail his RC44. We saw him, you know, in my day, he would steer the cup boat quite a bit. And, you know, he's a good sailor, and yeah, we need to get him back racing.
What was that cup campaign like? Tell us a little bit about it.
It was a bit of a shambles, to be honest. You know, 03 was, it was, you know, it was a bit messy. You know, we had Dicko in charge, and then Dicko out, and then Dicko back, and, you know, so it was a bit of a shambles. You know, it's always hard, you know, when you've got such a strong personality of Larry. And in 03, which was very different to the later cups, you know, the Oracle, even though I wasn't involved in any of the later Oracle ones, it was very clear that, well, Chris was very much in charge in 07, and then Russell, you know, after that. So whereas in 03, Bill Erklins, who you know, did an amazing job with 03, he was still stuck with the fact that a few other people had access to Larry, and Larry had access to them. And so as much as Bill could, you know, would manage it and do a great job, there was sort of all these things going on around him, unfortunately. And so 03 was tough. It was tough on everyone. We managed to make the Louis Vuitton finals, but, you know, we were never going to beat Lingy, to be honest. And we were sort of bouncing off the walls a little bit, and we went from having the smallest sail area to the biggest, from the deepest draft to the shallow. You know, we were just all over the place. But, you know, there's no doubt it set a strong platform for the Oracle campaigns going forward. And, you know, many of the same people were still there when they went on to win it and defend it. And so, you know, I'm sure as the other cup teams, you know, obviously, with Ineos and with American Magic, I'm sure they've learnt some amazing lessons on how they would do it differently next time. And at Oracle, we had to learn those same lessons. Everyone seems to have to. Alinghi's probably the case where they had enough of a core with enough of a say where they were able to do it without needing to learn the lessons,
They didn't put Larry off anyway.
No.
He came back for a lot more, so it couldn't have been that bad.
And he's back now, obviously, with Sail GP, which is, so there's no doubting the man's passion for sport. And, I like lots of people, I think, the Cup's been amazing and it's been very cool, but, Sail GP, to see those guys in One Design equipment is going to be cool. And, throw Slingsby and Outeridge into the mix as well. It's going to be very cool.
Yeah, that's for sure. Mike, you were also involved. I mean, you mentioned earlier the Marisha project, weren't you? I mean, a massive 40-something metre canting keel record breaker of the late 90s. Incredible. I mean, like the boat of the moment. What was your involvement there?
Yeah, so again, I was very young when I got asked. For the responsibility, I was young. To basically race skipper, as we called it, Marisha 3 when we did the 99 Sydney Hobart with the boat. So obviously it was the year after the tragedy, and it was the America's Cup. It was the Hobart leading up to the boats, all the super yachts supposedly coming here for the America's Cup in 2000. And so that was my first time really sort of in charge of the boat from a racing standpoint, and that's gone on forever since then. And that was on the 147-foot Briand ketch, which would actually broken the transatlantic record in 97. But after that, after the 2003 Cup, we basically worked with Robert Miller, the owner, and Jeff Tativo, who project managed it, and we came up with the Marisha 4, which, as you say, was this 140-foot plus carbon schooner, which was really designed to break the transatlantic record. And everything after that was just going to be a bonus, really. And we did that, and we hit, the boat came out on time, boat came out on weight, on budget. We sailed across the Atlantic. We went on standby. We were within a week of going on standby of when we first presented the feasibility study to the Miller family. We were within a week to the day of going on standby that we said, 2 years earlier. And we had an amazing run across the Atlantic and smashed the record, which then stood, whatever it was, for 15 years or something, until Comanche broke it 2 or 3 years ago. So very cool, very cool project. I was involved as part of the design team, and then we 4 or 5 of us were all there for the final stages of the build. And then all the commissioning and sea trialing, and then I race skippered again the boat for them for the whole time. It was in Marisha colours. Very cool time of our life. We had Emma and I had just got together, and so we had Marisha in the shed, and then her little Pindar Open 60 beside it in Cherbourg, and we lived with our whole Marisha family. We lived in this lovely old country estate in Foucaultville in France, and a fun time. And that was sort of my intro into the Amoca and the French world as well. Really cool memories, and we roared around the place with Marisha and broke the Atlantic record, and then brought the boat to the Pacific and broke the Pacific Cup record, and that was very cool.
What do you remember of that Atlantic crossing? I mean, you just break it. You smashed it.
Yeah, we did, and I mean the boat it was a little bit, I guess, like you know, how we were just talking about my first Whitbread race. The movie just played out how. I mean, you know what it's like when sometimes you have those regattas or events where things just happen to work, you know, and sometimes you have them when they just don't, and sometimes you have them when they do, and that whole Atlantic crossing, the movie just went as per the script. You know, we got a great system to go. Yeah, we had to tack through a little ridge first, but then we were off, and we just had day after day of this, just windy enough for us to really be able to light the thing up, and flat water so that where the waves weren't slowing us down, and we sailed a very we were lucky enough to sail a very efficient route from a mileage standpoint. So yeah, it all went beautifully to plan. The boat was a dream. In reality now you could, there are lots of boats that could break that time, but as we've seen, it's very hard to beat a big boat across an ocean, and it takes something special like Comanche to do it, but now Comanche's vulnerable to something that's going to foil in reality. That's going to be what it's going to take next, and yeah, so stand by for that, because that'll be a big chunk that comes off it. If I think of the conditions, which we got with Marisha, I mean, someone would have foiled 3/4 of the way across the Atlantic, and that's an amazing thing to envisage, So it's coming.
It is. It's a mad time in the sport, isn't it? It's
Yes.
pretty exciting. I hope you're all enjoying Mike Sanderson. I could listen to him all day. He's a man who talks with incredible enthusiasm. We're going to leave Mike there reminiscing on the remarkable Marisha 4, that 2003 transatlantic monohull record that was 6 days, 17 hours and 15 minutes and stood for 13 years. As a side note, 2 years later, Marisha 4 broke the transatlantic regatta conditions record, which has stood for 100 years. For all that time held by the mighty Charlie Barr, one of the leading lights of America's Cup sailing in the early 1900s. What a history our sport has. If you've enjoyed the pod and would like to support it, please do head over to buymeacoffee.com/sailing podcast. We work hard to bring you a real quality ad-free listen, and it's lovely to have your support. So many, many thanks for that. And thanks too to the talented Tim at Vertigo Films for producing the pods. It's been a busy month. We're both about to head to Tokyo for the games, so it's been a hectic time at Podcast HQ. Until next time, thank you so much for listening. Have fun on the water and sail safe, everyone.
This is Castle 1. Race officer speaking.
Lane line is on boundary up ahead, 35 seconds out.
A bit lower and faster here.
Ho, ho, ho. That's a good one, Jimmy.
Still gaining on the lane line there. Gaining on the lane line
We're looking
there.
at 10-5 and 42. Matching him on the boundary, yeah, copy.
This is Castle 1 standing by. Out.